This is Pumpkin Splice, written by Craig A. Falconer, narrated by Hector Carrillo. Chapter 1. What are you doing? We're not going in, Tobias blasted, keeping his volume low, but issuing the order to his sister with all the intensity of a shout. Standing at the edge of Farmer Johnson's barn as she tried to prise open the door, Kira glanced at him in disappointment. Why not? Me and Freddie both think we should, huh, boy? Tobias shook his head. At 12, he was older than his 9-year-old sister and their 2-year-old dog put together, as he often reminded her whenever he leaned on his seniority to justify a decision. Today, he didn't even bother with that. Listen, he told her. I only let you come in case I got caught. It'd be easier to say I was playing around with you guys than it would be if Johnson caught me sneaking around alone out here. I never planned to go inside, and I still don't. Understood? Kira hesitated. I guess I just didn't understand that my own brother was a chicken. I heard it was true, but I didn't want to believe it. Who said that? Tobias demanded, his demeanor changing instantly. People. He rolled his eyes. Okay, well, how about me for starters? Kira went on. I say it. I say. You are a chicken. If I'm wrong, prove it. After the strong words, she further challenged Tobias with an exaggerated raise of her eyebrows. You're so annoying with those faces, he snapped. You've been watching too much of that stupid witch show. She's not stupid, Kira angrily reacted, still wise enough to keep her voice down, but this time punctuating the words with a shove. And I only have one old DVD, remember? That's what this whole thing is all about. We need to win the pumpkin parade so that... Okay, Tobias groaned. I'll go in if I don't have to hear this whole thing again. As Kira smiled in victory, Tobias looked down at their ever-playful black lab. I guess Freddie isn't stopping us, the boy mused. And they say dogs can sense danger. Kira then stepped away from the unlocked but very heavy door, only too glad to let her stronger brother have a try at opening it. There was a reason they were about to enter a creepy and oddly unlocked barn on the morning of the creepiest day of the year. And to them, that reason felt like a good one. All week, they had seen weird lights, heard weird sounds, and sensed all kinds of general weirdness around Farmer Johnson's barn. Johnson was currently nowhere to be seen, busily preparing for the biggest day on the Hallow Creek calendar. Crowds came from miles away for the famous pumpkin parade and its associated costume contest, all because the town's name evoked Halloween so strongly. The money that poured into the small town was crucial for the economy, with more tourist visitors in October than every other month combined. Because so many people wanted to be in town for Halloween and there were no major hotels, the kids' parents even let out a room in their small farmhouse. Although this brought in some much-needed extra money, it meant that the kids had been rooming together for a few nights and driving each other even crazier than normal. One other thing it meant was that they had been together at night when the inexplicable lights flashed several times from Johnson's barn in the next field over, and that they both knew they weren't imagining it all. Despite a few days of brainstorming, they didn't have any real idea what could be going on inside. Johnson didn't usually enter the pumpkin parade, a competition where pumpkins were quite literally paraded down Hallow Creek's main street before prizes were dished out to the grower of the biggest pumpkin. A costume contest happened at the same time as the pumpkin parade, with tourists and locals alike walking alongside the pumpkins and hoping to win a prize for their costume. But the pumpkin parade itself could only be won by a local. As always, Tobias and Kira were entering both contests, in the expectation that they were more likely to have the biggest pumpkin out of 20 than the best costume out of 200. Different prizes were awarded each year, and this year marked the first time Farmer Johnson was entering the pumpkin parade. Given the timing, Kira couldn't shake the feeling that the competition had to have something to do with all the weirdness that was going on. Kira hadn't stopped obsessing about her own pumpkin contender for months. Thanks almost entirely to her hard work, this year had seen the family grow their biggest pumpkins ever. They all felt like there was a real chance they could win the prize: a lifetime subscription to Mondo Movie Mania, an online video service which included countless TV shows and, most importantly, the only one that Kira cared about seeing more of. Since the start of the summer, Kira had tirelessly read everything she could find about growing pumpkins, and had taken great effort to put it all into action. She worked on a perfect daily schedule, and once or twice, Tobias had even caught her talking to the biggest pumpkin of all, and playing relaxing music in its direction. All of this took effort, but in reality, the biggest challenge Kira had to deal with was keeping her dog Freddie away from her number one contender. Freddie was a good dog, the best, but pumpkins were his weakness. He would have eaten nothing else if given the choice, and couldn't help himself for trying to sneak a taste whenever no one was looking. Right now, though, as Tobias slowly opened the door of Farmer Johnson's mysterious barn, Freddie was growing more and more interested in something else. Whatever was inside, the dog was beyond intrigued. Freddie wasn't just not scared, like Tobias noted. By now, he could hardly wait to get inside. As soon as the door swung open, the kids knew why. Kira's mouth fell open in shock. "There goes the prize," Tobias mused, gazing around in wonder as each new sight exceeded the last. He felt like he had stepped into a sci-fi novel. More specifically, and more amazingly, he felt like he had stepped onto a spaceship. Lining the walls to the left were at least a dozen huge test tubes. One that looked just like the suspension pods from all the space movies he had watched with his dad. Except there were no people inside these pods, and no baby aliens. Instead, there were pumpkins. Small pumpkins, big pumpkins, huge pumpkins. In every tube, just pumpkins. Tobias glanced around the rest of the room very quickly and immediately knew that he wasn't really standing in a barn at all. This was no barn. This was a space-age science lab disguised as a barn. Chapter 2. "Whoa," Kira said, reacting to the amazing sight before her. The contrast between the rough wooden exterior and all the polished silver surfaces could hardly have been starker. There wasn't a single piece of farming equipment anywhere, just machines that seemed too futuristic to be real. Some of the equipment looked even weirder than the pumpkin-filled test tubes, and Tobias didn't have the foggiest idea of what it might be used for. He figured Johnson had needed a big building for all his stuff, somewhere no one would be suspicious of a large structure and where he could do his work without anyone bothering him. A barn on the edge of a little town like Hollow Creek made sense from that perspective, but this was just about the only thing making sense to Tobias right now. He wandered over to Freddie, who was sniffing keenly at the base of another door near the back of the room. Tobias tried the handle, but it was locked. Whatever was behind this door was even more interesting to Freddie than a room full of pumpkins, so Tobias was more than a little frustrated that it wouldn't budge.
"He's cheating,"
Kira suddenly complained.
"This isn't how you grow pumpkins. Toby, it's not fair. We need to tell everyone so he doesn't win the pumpkin parade. I work so hard to—"
Tobias held an urgent finger to his lips. He wasn't telling his sister to be quiet because she was wrong. although he did think there was clearly something much bigger going on here than Farmer Johnson trying to win the pumpkin parade's grand prize. No, much more troubling than that, he was telling her to be quiet so his ears could focus on something else. They had only been inside the lab for around a minute and hadn't had any real chance to explore, but Tobias was spooked by hearing something that sounded way too much like a car door for his liking. Sure enough, the slamming of the door was followed by the sound of footsteps outside.
"It's Johnson. We've got to get out of here,"
Tobias whisper-shouted to Kira. He didn't have to tell her twice, but he did have to pull Freddie away from the intriguing locked door. Freddie then seemed to get a sense of how scared the kids were, and he joined them in fleeing the barn. They made it outside just before Farmer Johnson came around, but the sound of their footsteps got his attention just as his had gotten theirs a few moments earlier. Muttering under his breath, Johnson slammed the barn closed behind him. He looked across the field and saw their backs.
"2 kids and a dog," he yelled. "I don't have to see your faces to know who you are."
They heard these words but didn't stop running.
"Dirty, rotten cheater,"
Kira scorned under her increasingly deep breaths. Tobias slowed down to stay beside her. He glanced back for the first time and saw Johnson standing at the edge of the mysterious barn-shaped lab. Whatever was really going on in there, and especially behind the locked door, Tobias knew they had stumbled upon something much bigger than a plan to win the grand prize at the pumpkin parade. And whatever it took, one way or another, he was going to find out just what that something was. Chapter 3. When the kids arrived home, falling over themselves in a jumble of fear and excitement, the look on their father's face reflected his impatience. "Where have you been?" he asked, briefly taking his eyes away from the light bulb he was fixing on the sizable haunted house in their yard. "You know how much we all have to do today."
"Farmer Johnson is cheating,"
Kira blurted out.
"He's growing monster pumpkins inside test tubes and—"
This time their father looked more than impatient. "If you kids aren't going to help out, at least don't hold me back with this nonsense, okay?"
"But, Dad," she protested, "there was this weird blue liquid and machines that—"
"Enough," he said, not raising his voice, but certainly sharpening his tone. He finished screwing in the bulb before continuing. "He has blue fertilizer in his barn, which for some reason you two were inside, and I'll deal with that tomorrow, sure as sugar. And this is something you're bothering me with today? Today of all days?" Tobias cleared his throat.
"It wasn't fertilizer, Dad, and that place isn't even a barn. He's got some space-age sci-fi lab going on in there. And don't say I've been reading too many books. Just come and take a look for 1 minute. That's all it'll take."
A smile suddenly broke out on their father's face. "Oh, so it's a prank. You want me to come over to the barn and then what? A monster jumps out at me? Ah, you kids. Your mistake was picking Johnson. He's a real pillar of the community, even helped with the corn pit this year, so there ain't no way he would be cheating in the pumpkin parade." As Kira opened her mouth to reply, Tobias covered it. He sighed and led her away.
"What was that?"
she complained, as soon as they were out of their father's earshot.
"We don't have any proof, and he's not going to believe us until we do. No one is. But if we keep pushing and we annoy Dad, he could ground us. Then we couldn't prove anything, and we'd miss the parade. You wouldn't have any chance to win the TV subscription you need for your show."
Kira was so surprised that Tobias didn't call it her stupid show like he usually did. She more or less agreed with his logic.
"So what do we do?"
Tobias led her inside and to their shared computer.
"We find out something about this guy. Something that makes it seem more possible. He might have been caught cheating at something else. Or maybe he has some job history that will make Dad pay attention."
In the few minutes it took to find information on the right Farmer Johnson, Tobias mentally ran through various options of what he might find. None were so clear-cut as the collection of information he stumbled upon. Jackpot, the boy proudly smiled. Chapter 4. Thanks to Tobias and his internet skills, the kids quickly learned that Farmer Johnson's full name was Nigel Johnson, and that he was only 62, at least 5 years younger than Tobias would have guessed. The bio also revealed that Johnson had been a top advisor for a biotech and robotics company until he was fired for downloading restricted files to his personal computer. Without a single word, Tobias jumped to his feet and ran to his father. "Dad, you need to hear this." Kira arrived just in time to hear the rest. "Farmer Johnson used to work for a biotech company and he got fired for stealing their files. He's doing stuff like that in the lab. And robots, it said," Kira added. Tobias shushed her. Their father, currently setting up the entrance turnstile for the haunted house that would open in just a few hours, closed his eyes and breathed slowly. "Kids, it was funny at first, but one more interruption and you're grounded. Understood? But no buts except the ones that'll be grounded if you don't let me finish this. Really? Today of all days?" Unquestionably, Halloween was the biggest day of the year for Tobias and Kira's family. Their mother was already set up at her stall on the other side of town, selling pumpkin candles and related crafts, as well as flashing light-up toys for the families who came from near and far to enjoy the big night in Hallow Creek. Their father, meanwhile, was putting the final touches on the various attractions that made best use of their land. From many years of experience, he knew that these were the haunted house and the corn maze. A corn pit inside the maze was attractive to many of the visiting children, and placing it in the maze meant that their parents also had to pay the entrance fee to take them in. With farming revenue getting more squeezed every year, small things like this were important ways to make as much money as possible from the Halloween festivities. For the second time in just a few minutes, Tobias and Kira sulked away with their tails between their legs. "We don't need information, we need proof," Kira said. Tobias couldn't disagree. "The media and news people will be here soon. Even if Dad doesn't believe us, we could show them." "So you think we should go back and you'll let me come?" He nodded. Although he would never say it to her face, Kira was smart and brave. Tobias also remembered his cousin saying he was too young to do things with them and how bad it had felt. However annoying Kira could sometimes be, she wasn't the worst, and Tobias didn't ever want to be like them. "You can come, but we can't risk Johnson being there when we go back," Tobias stated. "I think the only time we can be sure he'll be gone is right when the pumpkin parade is starting. We could take your pumpkin over to the starting area, put it on the trailer, then run to Johnson's barn lab. It won't take us long to grab some stuff and maybe even find some notes on his desk. Hopefully, something like that will explain what he's doing and be the physical proof we need." "I like it," his sister replied. "Mom and Dad will be busy with the events at that time too, so we should be able to sneak off pretty easily." "We're only sneaking off this one time," Tobias said, suddenly sounding responsible. "And you're only sneaking off because you're with me and I say it's okay, okay?" Kira smiled widely. "Deal." Chapter 5. Glad that Tobias was going to let her return to the barn, Kira looked at her watch. "We have 3 hours. Will you let me do your Frankenstein face paint so it's better than when you do it yourself?" Kira didn't have to ask what Tobias was going as, since he always chose Frankenstein's monster. But this year, she wanted him to make more of an effort so the family had a better chance of winning the TV subscription. After all, it would work on every TV in the house. Tobias shrugged. "Sure, I guess we've got time now.
He's only going to be using one pumpkin for the parade, so the rest should still be there. Yeah, and we only need to prove he's cheating before the end of the night, Kira chimed in. That's when the measuring and the judging happens. I think there's a lot more going on than Johnson just cheating to win the contest. But you're right about the timing, Tobias said. We get one chance. We'll bring Freddie again, but this time I'll bring some treats in my pocket too, just in case we need to get him away from some pumpkins in a hurry. You know what he's like. Tell me about it, Kira laughed, recalling all the time she'd had to chase the playful dog away from her prize pumpkin in recent weeks. As the day wore on and Tobias became a more and more convincing version of the famous green monster, he was increasingly impressed by Kira's face painting skills. She let the green dry before she added some purple scars and then handed Tobias the wig that would make his hair look a suitable black color instead of its usual blonde. For Kira, on the other hand, the costume contest brought something of a reluctant compromise. She wanted to go as her favorite witch, the one she was so keen to see more of via the TV subscription she hoped to win. But Tobias had told her a week ago that no one else would know who she was supposed to be. The show had first aired long before either of them were born, he said, and a lot of people weren't familiar with it. She sadly realized he was right. Her costume for the night was therefore a more traditional witch's outfit, complete with the black hat, broomstick, and wart-covered fake nose. The kids were happy with their costumes and didn't have to lie when telling each other they looked good. But both quietly knew that some of the grown-ups who came from other towns and cities were mega serious about their costumes, and that someone in a $1,000 getup that took 100 hours to complete was likely to win. Even though the prize for best costume was another TV subscription along with the bonus prize of a year's supply of candy, something a kid would typically want more than an adult, anyone with eyes could see that certain adults took their costumes way more seriously than any kid ever would. It was still worth trying to win the costume contest, but their real hope for the night was Kira's prize pumpkin. It was so big that it took both of them to lift it onto a skateboard, and they took great care when they wheeled it the short distance to the main road where the parade would start. Kira kissed goodbye for now to her huge pumpkin, which had the initials KP written on the back in large blue paint, as one of the parade marshals carefully lifted it from their skateboard and up onto the large trailer. The kids couldn't see high enough to tell if any others were bigger, but the marshal looked impressed. They also got some nice compliments on their costumes from the gathered crowd, and they hung around near the starting line until a chance came to sneak off. Some of the other costumes were incredible, from werewolves and mermaids to knights in shining armor. There weren't a lot of kids around, as far as they could see, and it looked almost certain that a grown-up would take the best costume prize. The rest of the costume contest participants would walk alongside the trailer on a route that would take around 20 minutes before the pumpkin measuring and costume judging took place, so the kids knew they didn't have long to get back. With Freddie at their side, they set off into the darkness towards Farmer Johnson's barn lab with just a flashlight to lead the way. Happy cheers from the nearby Ferris wheel and corn maze filled the air, but Tobias and Kira had only one thing on their mind. "Ready?" he asked when they reached the door. No glimmer of light came from inside. Without doubt, Johnson was gone. "Ready," Kira gulped. Freddie sniffed eagerly at the large door, which once again was tightly closed without being locked. "Maybe locks would make it too suspicious," Tobias tried to reason with himself. "And we are out in the middle of a field, so he's not likely to need one. Plus, he's been coming in and out," Kira added. "There's probably usually a lock." Tobias nodded, happy enough to believe that, and applied enough force to open the door without too much trouble. Freddie dashed inside without hesitation, even before the flashlight revealed what he was heading for. "Holy smokes," Tobias whispered. Holy smokes was right. Chapter 6.
Tobias shone his flashlight into the lab, illuminating two major surprises. The first was that the inner door, previously locked, was now wide open. But the real surprise, and the one that had both kids staring in slack-jawed wonder while their dog charged forward for a closer look, was the truck-sized pumpkin on the other side of the door. Instead of being inside a tube-like pod, this pumpkin was sitting out in the open with several tubes connected to it. Those tubes led to empty pods and must have been pumping in the weird chemical concoction, Tobias figured. His mind wasn't doing a whole lot of thinking as he stared at the impossible vegetable, and even the pumpkin-loving Freddy stopped in confusion when he reached it. Usually, Freddy would gleefully jump on top of a large pumpkin and roll around with it like a puppy. This was no large pumpkin, though. This one truly was the size of a truck. At that moment, it struck Tobias that there were probably two reasons why Johnson wasn't entering it into the parade. Firstly, that it was way too obviously genetically modified to go under the radar. And secondly, that it literally wouldn't have fit on the wide bed trailer.
Dirty, rotten cheater,
Kira scowled. She flicked a light switch on the wall to fully illuminate everything inside the lab's two rooms. Tobias stood stunned, still staring at the colossal pumpkin before him. Only when Freddy turned to him in evident confusion did he walk forward.
"It's okay, boy,"
he said reassuringly, crouching to pet the confused dog.
"It's just a pumpkin."
Once he was in the second room, previously locked out of reach, Tobias noticed that the walls and workstations around its edges were filled with documents. The only thing in the middle of the floor was the giant pumpkin, and the only machines he could see were the pods and tubes providing it with its mysterious nutrition.
"Hey, I found something,"
he called to Kira.
"Is it a giant pumpkin?"
she asked, trying to force some humor.
"It looks like Johnson's notes and stuff like we wanted,"
he went on, his tone growing more hopeful and excited with each word. Kira continued to the threshold between the main lab area and the giant pumpkin's annex, too creeped out by the sheer scale of the thing to get any closer. Freddy joined her, his interest clearly over in an object that was frustratingly too large for him to tackle.
"I'm going to skim some of these notes to see what's the best stuff to take,"
Tobias said, sensing his little sister's unease.
"I'll be quick."
She nodded. For the next few minutes, Tobias rushed between different worktops and the various printed and handwritten notes that lay atop them. There were no computers. As he learned new information, he tried his best to pass it on.
"It says Johnson has been splicing genes from different plants to achieve rapid and sustained growth,"
he explained.
"There's a genetic switch that tells things when to stop growing, and the research is basically overriding that. That and the final limit on how big something should grow. There's stuff about, it looks like if you take all the energy stored in something dense, like an acorn or a sunflower seed, then he found a way to make the plant grow as quickly as a sunflower and as consistently as an oak tree. We just did stuff kind of like this at school about genetic engineering in animals. Oh, I know how you'll understand. It's like Jurassic World." "Yeah?"
Kira asked, hardly understanding, but now at least having some clue what her brother was talking about. She had always thought he was something of a nerd, but every now and again his smartness could be useful.
"Yeah, it's like Jurassic World, except with plants. Remember how they mix different dinosaur genes to make an even cooler dinosaur? One that can be smarter, stronger, maybe even able to camouflage itself? And this weird blue stuff he's giving it from the pods is kind of like specially engineered dinosaur food."
Kira nodded slowly.
"All that to win the pumpkin parade?"
Tobias walked as he talked.
"No way. Which is why I need to find something about his motive. You know, why he's doing it. Maybe there will be something in this folder over here, the one that says opportunities."
Sure enough, this folder contained information on what Farmer Johnson hoped to do with the technologies he was developing and testing. And once again, Tobias relayed the information to his sister as soon as he learned it.
"This is the best folder to take,"
he announced after a brief skim of the first few printed pages.
"It basically says he's going to cash in on his enhanced growth techniques by licensing it to companies who have patented plants for stuff like medicine and biofuel. And there's even a part about selling it on the black market to drug cartels so they can grow more of what they need. And, wow, this guy is a real piece of work. It says the main danger is that he needs to keep the tech close to his chest because otherwise his clients would lose their advantages and other people would want to use it for growing food."
"That's what we should do with it," Kira reacted.
"If we could make the crops grow faster and bigger, no one in the world would have to be hungry."
Tobias nodded. He had been more concerned by the other elements, especially after his recent school classes about how dangerous illegal drugs could be. But Johnson's selfishness was pretty disgusting from the angle Kira was seeing it too.
"I can't believe he would do this,"
she said bitterly.
"What kind of a guy would stop people?"
Tobias turned around immediately, startled by how suddenly Kira had stopped talking. When he saw the reason, terror took over. Freddy was barking wildly, but Tobias could hardly hear it through the total and utter shock he was experiencing. A man in a mummy mask, Farmer Johnson for sure, had grabbed his little sister by the arm and was dragging her across the floor. Blinking himself out of his terrified stupor, Tobias did the only thing he could do: dive forward to save her. Chapter 7. Tobias lunged at Johnson, aiming for the villain's neck like the lions and tigers always did in the documentary shows he watched so often. Johnson was dressed as a pretty darn convincing mummy from head to toe, but that was the least scary part of what was going on. He was a horrible man. They knew that now, and he was clearly going to do whatever it took to protect his dirty secrets. Tobias came up a little short in his aim, pulling instead at the man's shoulder. This simultaneously stopped Johnson in his tracks and weakened his grip enough to free Kira.
"Run!"
Tobias demanded, still grasping the man's heavily bandaged arm. But just like their loyal dog Freddy, Kira refused to leave her brother alone as the evil Farmer Johnson turned to face him. She grabbed at Johnson's other arm, striking what looked like the futile pose of a kitten wrestling a couch. To her shock as much as anyone else's, the sudden jerk she applied to Johnson's arm was enough to dislodge his shoulder from the socket, all the way out of the socket. At that moment, as the arm fell to the ground and sparking wires revealed themselves, the kids realized that they weren't facing down Farmer Johnson. They were facing down an angry and violent robot. Chapter 8. Tobias roughly jerked the robotic arm he was holding, copying Kira's movement and quickly achieving the same success. An armless robot was far less of a threat, naturally, but Tobias had the bright idea to pick up the heavy arm and use it as a weapon. He swung for the fences and hit a home run on his first try, knocking the head to the floor and stopping the robot in its tracks at the same moment. The robot didn't fall over like a human would have, with the legs and armless torso instead just standing there like a broken statue.
"What the heck is going on?"
he asked, speaking as much to himself as to Kira. Instead of answering, she crouched down and removed the mummy mask from the decapitated robot's head. Neither of the kids knew exactly what to expect underneath, but they definitely didn't expect there to be no face at all. All they could see were more wires and a bunch of complicated-looking circuit boards. Freddy pawed at the head and caused it to roll slowly across the floor, but the kids were staring at each other in disbelief.
"A robot mummy?"
Kira asked.
"There's nothing about robots planned for tonight, right? No special new part of the parade or anything?"
To an outside observer, this scene would have looked even weirder, what with Kira in her witch costume and Tobias decked out as a spitting image of Frankenstein's green-faced monster. Tobias gulped.
"If there is, I missed the memo."
Although they were still shaken by the confrontation, both were breathing major sighs of relief, not only that they had survived it, but also that Farmer Johnson still didn't know they were there.
Maybe there's something about the robots in one of the other notebooks or folders,
Kira suggested, inflecting the words into a question but leaving no time for Tobias to answer it before she set off to look at the worktops he hadn't checked during his own search for information on the giant pumpkin that suddenly felt like a sideshow to the main event. In a day of so many surprises and frights, one thing the kids couldn't complain about was the speed with which they were able to find the kind of information they were looking for. This was less surprising each time it happened, since the fact Johnson left notes about his motive for the giant pumpkin experiment made it more likely he would do the same about the robots, but they both still recognized how lucky it was. A folder labeled animatronics caught Kira's eye very quickly, at which point she called her brother over to check it out. He was a much faster skim reader, so they followed the by-now familiar pattern of Tobias reading the notes and passing the information on to Kira as he digested it. This time, he told her that Johnson was testing lifelike robots to see if they could pass as humans. What he was specifically testing was whether their movements were convincing enough to seem real, rather than their appearances. And his notes explained that this made a Halloween costume contest the ideal testing ground. The notes reflected Johnson's gladness that was able to bypass the uncanny valley problem in this way. Tobias had seen a TV show about robotics quite recently and knew what this meant, so he passed his prior knowledge on to Kira.
Basically, it's really tough to make a robot's face look like a human. And people don't like looking at faces that are almost human. We don't mind cartoonish robots with robot faces, but we get a kind of disgusted feeling if something is almost right. It gets uncanny, but it's not close enough to seem real. So Johnson is using tonight as a test. It says here he has 20 robots for the costume contest, and if one wins, he can use that as a selling point when he's licensing this tech. Oh, and then it says, I get it. Get what?
Kira asked. She didn't muscle in to read the notes, knowing it was quicker to let Tobias tell her.
It's the same with the pumpkins. He wanted one to win the contest so he could prove to his potential big money clients that the tech works and the results can pass as real. It says the pumpkins would pass the sight and touch test tonight if no one knows his entry is genetically modified, and then the taste and nutrition test would come later. So you were right, he does want to win the contest. In fact, both contests, but for different reasons. He doesn't want a TV subscription. He wants the millions of dollars this stuff can make him once he has proof that the concept works. And what kind of stuff does it say the robots could be used for?
Kira inquired.
Does it say that, like it did about the fast-growing plants?
Tobias flipped through pages in this new folder until his eyes lit up when he landed on the key points.
Security guards, spies, oh man, assassins. The robots can move like people, so if their faces are covered, they can pass as people. And they don't have morals. They don't have a conscience. They would do whatever Johnson and his evil clients want. We have to stop this,
Kira insisted. For the first time, she leaned in and took over the reading while Tobias stared at the wall and thought. He nodded.
We definitely need to stop them, but these robots are dangerous. We can't just go out there and tell everyone, or the robots could do something really bad. Who knows? Maybe he's remotely controlling them. Maybe they're pre-programmed to react in certain ways. We can't risk it. We need to do something. Bingo!
Kira said excitedly.
Look, there's an emergency remote control to disable them. He's written it in pen on the last page.
Tobias looked down. Sure enough, the scrawled words were there. He read it aloud.
Emergency shutoff remote. Corn pit floor. So he hid it in the corn pit? Why would he write this if no one else is supposed to see it? I think it was a reminder to himself,
Tobias said.
The corn pit only got set up a few days ago, and yeah, Dad said Johnson helped with it this year, remember? We need to go. Grab that folder and I'll get the pumpkin one. We need to get that remote. From the bottom of the corn pit? Kira asked.
Tobias shrugged, albeit with a reluctant look on his face.
That's where it is.
5 Halloweens ago, when he had been 7 and Kira was only 4, 2 older out-of-town kids had been very cruel to Kira at the corn pit. They had repeatedly thrown kernels at her and tried to push her under the surface, and no grown-ups had been close enough to see it or do anything about it. That left it up to Tobias himself. And although he saved Kira from the bullies, he did so only by inviting all of their attention on himself. Maybe because he was a boy, and maybe because he was older, they were even crueler to him. They filled his clothes with the awful kernels and tore his cowboy costume, which would have been bad enough, but one of the bullies even pushed some kernels deep into his nostrils. A grown-up came along just in time, thanks to Kira's quick thinking of running to get someone. But 5 years later, Tobias couldn't help but think of that horrible experience every time he saw or heard about that blasted corn pit.
Why did Johnson have to leave his remote control in the stupid corn pit?
He silently lamented, before thinking it was probably because the pit was so gross that no one would ever stumble upon something at the bottom unless they were looking for it.
We need to go,
Kira said, pulling Tobias from his brief and unwelcome trip down memory lane. He nodded and set off. As they sprinted outside with Freddie at their side, all 3 leaving the bizarre-looking mummified legs standing deathly still while the same robot's head and arms lay on the floor, Kira suddenly raised an objection. She had grabbed her broomstick and hat off the floor before leaving, and dearly wished she could have flown across the field like a real witch.
Wait, she bellowed. Toby, the corn pit is in the maze, and the maze is that way. Where are we going? Ferris wheel, Tobias replied. Huh?
She prodded, panting as she ran.
The corn maze is a maze, Kira. We need to see it from above to see the way in. Otherwise, we could be stuck for way too long. This'll take 5 minutes, but it'll save us time. Remember last year when you got lost inside? So did you, Kira protested. Yeah, but not this time. We'll get a view from the sky and remember the directions we have to turn. We can do that, don't you think? If we work together?
Kira grunted her agreement. She wasn't happy about this plan, but was glad that Tobias at least didn't goad her about her fear of heights, which he definitely knew about. She also liked it when he was willing to work together on things instead of telling her to get out of his room and leave him alone like he'd been doing a lot lately. And perhaps most importantly, she knew that the stakes were much higher than any Ferris wheel could ever be. The wheel did look too high when they reached it, but Tobias still comforted her by saying that he would be right beside her and it wouldn't last for long. The queuing area for the ride and the ride itself were both completely deserted since almost everyone was watching the start of the parade, and this was more than welcome given the rush the kids were in. Tobias handed a few dollars to the ride operator, who was dressed as a scarily realistic werewolf, then walked up a small flight of stairs and followed Kira into their enclosed compartment. The werewolf held out his hands in a request for the 2 items in the kids' arms, their 2 important folders. After their incident with the mummified robot, both were a little bit frightened by the werewolf until the person inside the costume spoke along with the arms out gesture. Sorry, health and safety rules say no loose items, the man said. Tobias racked his brain for a few seconds, then handed the folder over. There was no way around it, and he had to see the location of the corn pit within the maze. Time was ticking. The werewolf placed the folder on the ground indifferently, then did the same with Kira's. When his hands were empty, he kept them out. Hat and broomstick, too, he said with an apologetic shrug. Rules are rules. No loose items, just like no dogs. Kira sighed and handed them over. The wolfman put them down not too far from where Freddie was sitting. At last, the man locked the compartment to secure Tobias and Kira inside. Have fun, kids, he said. And only then did the wheel operator remove his mask, revealing something even scarier than a humanoid robot. This time, there was a face, and it belonged to Farmer Johnson. He grinned an evil grin and hit the button to start the ride.
I sure hope you don't get stuck at the top.
Chapter 9.
Tobias!
Kira screamed.
What are we going to do?
Just as the scream escaped Kira's lips, the devious Farmer Johnson turned up the ride's scary Halloween music to make sure no one could hear their calls for help. A few moments later, when the wheel reached the top, he paused the ride and left them stranded. Tobias had the perfect view of the maze and could see the way to the all-important corn pit, but this was hardly what he'd had in mind.
I can hardly even see Freddy,
Kira said.
Freddy,
Tobias said, a lightning bolt of an idea striking him. And given the height of their metal compartment, he felt relieved there was no real lightning to be seen.
I have his treats in my pocket. Maybe that's it. If I can drop them just past the button that starts and stops the ride, or even better, if I can get one right on the button, he might put his weight on it. It's the only thing I can think of.
Kira, scared of heights and only too aware of how little time they had before Farmer Johnson would erase all evidence of his dastardly selfish plans, now that he knew they'd stumbled upon them, could hardly stop herself from crying. Tobias put a hand on her knee and promised her that this plan could really work. He also said that even if it didn't, someone would find them in a few hours at most. The worst that could happen was that Johnson would destroy all the evidence before they could prove anything, but they weren't in any serious danger. No one else was around due to the huge distraction of the pumpkin parade, but crowds would be milling around this area again soon, and the real ride operator would be back in charge. As soon as he heard the word hours leave his lips, though, Tobias regretted it. That was hardly what someone with a fear of heights wanted to hear. To his surprise and admiration, though, his little sister's tears weren't about herself.
But if we don't get down quickly, she stammered, we won't be able to prove what he's been doing, and all of the special new food-growing ideas won't be able to stop people from being hungry.
She was usually annoying, as all little sisters were, but Tobias felt proud of Kira in that moment and doubled down on his commitment to make the plan work. Before Tobias dropped the first dog treat, Kira stopped him.
Wait, she said. Do we definitely know the route through the maze? To the corn pit? Right, forward, left, Tobias said. That's my 4. Forward, left, right, forward. That's yours. Just remember, forward, left, right, forward. Okay? FLRF.
Kira held her arms out like she was dancing, pointing outwards, then left and right, and outwards once more. Tobias didn't complain. Whatever worked, he would take it. Looking out from their elevated position also revealed the main road, where the pumpkin parade was in full swing. A lot of people were walking alongside the trailer, but the kids now knew that almost 20 of them weren't really people at all. Right, forward, left, Tobias repeated in his head. He then stretched his arm through the bars of the compartment and dropped a dog treat towards the ride's start and stop button. It didn't land particularly close, but the positive element was that Freddy raced to it right away and was quickly looking up in anticipation of more.
Good thing our dog has an appetite,
Tobias joked, finding a brief second for humor. Kira smiled at his attempt to make her laugh and ease her mind, but she really just hoped that his next attempt at landing a treat on the button was better than the first. It was, but not by much. The third was even better, but still didn't quite land in the right spot. The fourth slipped out of his hand a moment too early and didn't go anywhere close, and when it came to the fifth, he warned Kira that there were only 4 left.
Do them all at once, she suggested. This isn't working, but that might. And maybe even if you miss, The way Freddy has to move between the treats could take him over the button. It's worth a shot, don't you think? You try one, then I'll do that with the 3 if yours doesn't work, Tobias suggested. Unless you want to try 2.
She accepted 1, but no more. Had their parents seen them working together like this, they would never have believed it. Kira's effort was fairly close, but not close enough, meaning that all hope rested on her idea of a simultaneous multi-drop. Tobias held his breath and let the last 3 treats fall to the ground. One looked all set to land on the button, and it did, but it then bounced off. An agonizing feeling of disappointment rushed through the kids, but Freddy's excited reaction to seeing not 1, but 3 treats fall from the sky at once gave him a glimmer of hope. The dog bounced a few times before choosing which to go for first, and then bounded towards the second in a direction that took one of his paws directly onto the button. Before they knew it, the wheel was moving again.
Nice drop,
Kira beamed.
Nice idea,
Tobias said.
But you know what comes next, right?
Kira gulped, joy replaced by fear all over again.
Yeah,
she replied weakly.
We have to jump out.
Chapter 10.
I have to jump out,
Tobias corrected her.
As long as you're okay going round one more time by yourself, I can jump out and then stop the ride next time you're at the bottom. You can do it. I know you can.
Kira didn't look too sure.
Just close your eyes and pretend you're on a beach or something, he continued. I'm going to have to go in a second, but you'll be back around and safely on the ground in no time. Trust me.
With her eyes closed, Kira nodded weakly.
See you soon,
Tobias said. He then took a deep breath of his own and jumped from the compartment when it reached its lowest point. This was somewhere around 7 feet off the ground, but was complicated by the fact that the wheel was moving too quickly for him to carefully step onto the metal stairs, meaning that he had to leap and clear the stairs, making sure he landed on the soft grass just beyond them. He made it, with no real bumps or bruises, and was back on his feet with his hand hovering over the stop button just as quickly as Freddy was at his side to check he was okay. When Kira came back around, Tobias slammed his fist onto the button. The strength of his press left nothing to chance, bringing the wheel to a safe halt and allowing his gratefully relieved sister to step out and reach the ground via the metal stairs.
Do you remember your directions?
She asked, indicating that her head was straight back in the game.
Yep,
Tobias said, avoiding saying them out loud in case it confused Kira's memory of her 4.
You?
She nodded.
Let's do this.
Chapter 11. Aside from the flashlight, the kids ran empty-handed toward the maze entrance. Farmer Johnson had fled with both of the folders, and Kira hadn't stopped to grab her hat and broomstick this time, so great was their urgency. There was no one at the entrance to the maze apart from one masked attendant their dad had employed to hand out tickets. But he recognized the kids and allowed them inside without stopping them to ask why they were in such a hurry. The timing was working in their favor in the sense that everyone else was too busy with the pumpkin parade to be at the other attractions right now. But every passing second made their task more urgent and more difficult.
Right, forward, left,
Tobias said to himself, repeating it like a mantra. Freddy and Kira stuck right beside him, and 4 choices later he turned to his little sister.
Please tell me you still remember.
Kira responded in the form of a dance, pointing her arms outwards, then left and right, and outwards once more.
Forward, left, right, forward. Easy.
Tobias smiled and they both set off. Freddy continued to follow, always keen to stick with his kind owners and 2 best friends, but even more so tonight when he had reason to think they might still have some treats in their pockets. 4 more choices later, the corn pit lay before them. The whole maze was well lit and the pit area was brightest of all. Tobias knew what had to be done, but the ocean of kernels brought back memories of the bullies he wished he could forget.
I remember what happened,
Kira said to him.
I know I was only 4, and we've never talked about it on any of the Halloweens since then when we've had to look at this thing. But I remember what happened. I remember what they did to you, and I remember they did it because you stuck up for me. You did that to save me. And if you want me to do this to save everyone who can be helped by the technology he's trying to selfishly hide away and use for bad stuff, I'll do it. You did it for me. And I'll do it again,
Tobias said, forcing a smile that looked more than a little odd through his scarred Frankenstein face paint.
I'll do it again, so just stay out here and make sure Freddy doesn't dive in after me, okay? That's an important job. Be as fast as you can, she replied.
Tobias laughed.
I wasn't planning on being in there a second longer than I need to. I'm just going to feel for the bottom with my hand and check it section by section. It won't take long.
At that, he was gone. The pit was deeper than he remembered, and although he could easily close his eyes and mouth while he felt for the remote control, he could do nothing to stop the feeling of kernels in his nostrils. This brought horrible flashbacks into his head, and he had to come up for air after just a few seconds. Blowing the kernels out of his nostrils, Tobias tried to focus.
You can do it,
Kira called from behind him.
I know you can, and so does Freddy.
The dog barked gently at the sound of his name, almost like he was agreeing. This gave Tobias energy to dive back down and slide his hand along the floor in search of the
remote control.
Tobias grasped it with both hands, feeling it slowly with each in case one might have been wrong. But no, he was sure. He had it. Rushing to the surface even more quickly than last time, he held it aloft like the trophy it was.
You did it,
Kira said, beaming with joy. But the smile quickly faded into a look Tobias was far less happy to see.
Oh man.
Chapter 12.
Oh man, what?
Tobias asked, still grasping the remote control, but now worried by the sudden change in Kira's tone. He glanced around in every direction, looking for a sign of any potential dangers. His concerns faded as soon as his sister started laughing again.
Well, you don't exactly look like Frankenstein anymore, she said. More like Cornystein.
Tobias touched his face, thinking he could feel an odd sensation on his skin, and sure enough, his fingers passed over countless kernels of corn that had stuck to his dry but still sticky face paint.
I bet there won't be any Cornystein at the parade,
he chuckled, rushing out of the pit and encouraging Kira and Freddy to run back to the edge of town with him as quickly as their legs would allow. It wasn't far, maybe 3 minutes away at most, but they'd already done quite a lot of running. Nevertheless, Kira continued like a trooper and ran as fast as she could. She more than once told Tobias to run ahead and insisted she would be okay so long as he gave her the flashlight. But he flat out refused to leave her alone when Farmer Johnson and his demented army of robots could be lurking anywhere.
We can't hit this button to pause the robots until we're there to explain,
Tobias said over his own deep breaths.
Otherwise, people are going to go crazy wondering what's going on. I'll climb onto the trailer and tell everyone what's happening. Then, hit the button. Seeing is believing, and that's all the proof we need. Once people see that, they'll be way more likely to believe the rest of what we say. And there's no way Johnson could have destroyed all the evidence. He only had like 10 minutes of a head start. And he's old.
Kira shared her brother's optimism about how things would play out. She was usually more optimistic than him, if anything. And before long, they reached the main road and could hear the parade up ahead.
We could think about this forever and not decide on the exact best way to do it,
Kira said.
But we don't have any time, so just go with whatever comes into your head. The main thing is that we're here and we're going to stop those robots. Seeing is believing, remember?
Tobias agreed entirely. Less than a minute later, when they reached the pumpkin parade, just after it reached its finishing point, he cleared his throat and yelled as loudly as he could,
Farmer Johnson is cheating! Some of these contestants are robots!
This drew a warm burst of laughter from the crowd, quite understandably. But all of that stopped when Tobias hit the terminate button and each of the robots immediately ceased moving. This didn't cause any obviously non-human reactions in most cases, but the handful of robots that had been midway through taking a step were left hanging as though time itself had been paused. 3 in particular were instantly noticeable, bringing frightened screams from some of the people nearest them.
There's nothing to worry about,
Tobias insisted, trying to make sure things didn't get out of hand. Keeping a lid on everything and making the rest of the night go as normally as possible in front of the media was the best way of giving the local sheriff and the kids' parents a chance to look over everything at Farmer Johnson's place and decide what to do next. To that end, Kira joined Tobias in telling everyone that they found out someone was cheating in both contests. Not only by putting robots in costumes so he had multiple chances of winning, but also by genetically altering his pumpkin crop to make one bigger than anyone who was playing fair could ever compete with.
It was Farmer Johnson. His pumpkin is probably going to be the biggest one there.
Once she shifted her viewing angle so that she could see all of the pumpkins on the trailer, Kira noticed that hers was indeed the second biggest. Only one was bigger, and sure enough, it had the initials NJ painted on the side. Farmer Johnson, or Nigel Johnson, had set out to win the pumpkin parade as a way of proving the viability of his ideas, and entering the more impressive but obviously altered super pumpkin from his lab would have been a self-defeating move. Altered? One of the judges on the pumpkin trailer asked. Wow, that's something we're going to have to look into. But since you were right about these robots, I don't think we have much choice other than to provisionally disqualify NJ, which is, let's see, Nigel Johnson's pumpkin from consideration.
So, I win?
Kira asked, beaming with joy as she pointed proudly to her pumpkin.
That one is mine.
The judge smiled, if a little suspiciously now that he realized Kira's exposé seemed set to result in her own victory. Well, like I said, we'll have to investigate, but if we find evidence that Nigel Johnson's pumpkin has indeed been genetically altered, you will win the subscription to Mondo Movie Mania, giving unlimited access to the thousands of movies and TV shows.
Yes!
Kira yelled, unable to contain herself.
Have you judged the costumes yet?
Tobias chimed in, sensing an opportunity to get his hands on the additional bonus prize for that contest, a lifetime supply of candy. The judge, grinning again, gave a knowing nod. We have, young man. But the original winner of that prize is one I can disqualify right away. Every pair of eyes around the trailer followed the judge's finger towards a Tin Man costume that was now striking an impossible pose that clearly identified its wearer as a robot. That means we have to rejudge the Corn Monster! A loud voice interrupted, cutting off the judge. His costume is great and unique, even if he hadn't exposed all that cheating. Yeah, give it to the kid, another added. Corn Boy, a third chimed in. Before long, the chorus of Corn Boy, Corn Boy, Corn Boy became a cacophony that the judge wouldn't have been able to resist even if he'd wanted to. Well, it seems like it's unanimous. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and ghouls, I give you our winner. When the judge leaned in to get his name, Tobias answered aloud for everyone to hear.
Cornystein!
The judge formally announced Tobias, aka Cornystein, as the winner of the costume contest, then held a microphone to the boy's mouth so he didn't have to shout anymore.
Technically, I think this award should go to my sister too,
Tobias said.
because she helped with my costume and I think hers is better anyway. Even without the broom and the hat and the fake nose that fell off, she still has the dress. Besides, just because you all don't recognize it, that doesn't change anything. She looks just like the one specific witch she's trying to look like. Seriously, Kira, you're the best Samantha I ever saw. It's Sabrina,
She scolded, not getting that Tobias was messing with her on purpose by hitting this joke one last time. Just seconds later, their father appeared at their side, having heard their voices over the commotion of the crowd. He arrived as quickly as he could, and the kids were just as quick in telling him everything that had happened and what they thought should happen next. "I'm sorry I didn't listen earlier today," he said, clearly meaning every word and upset with himself for not believing them. "You kids get home and I'll take the sheriff over to Johnson's barn right away, because that does sound like the best way to do this without making a huge spectacle that could go wrong. Good thinking, you two." After 2 long hugs and 1 repeated apology, their father ran to get the sheriff's attention. Barely any time later, the kids saw them both set off towards whatever was left in the barn.
"You're going to be able to watch your show as much as you want,"
Tobias said, turning to Kira.
"And you're going to have candy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner until you get sick of it."
She laughed back.
As if I'm ever going to get sick of candy.
With that, they headed for home to a round of applause from the still gathered crowd. Those tourists would continue to enjoy the town's festivities for hours to come, no doubt riding the Ferris wheel and navigating the corn maze without any idea of the adventures the kids had gotten involved in while everyone else was following the parade. The full story of what had happened in Hallow Creek on this most remarkable of all Halloweens would come out soon enough. But for now, the crowd was blissfully unaware of almost everything that had happened besides their knowledge of a cheating local and his impressive robots. Later in the night, when the kids' father eventually returned from the mysterious barn-based lab just 1 field over, they would gleefully learn that Farmer Johnson had been caught red-handed by the sheriff, caught in the act of trying to clear the lab of everything that proved what he'd been up to. All the kids knew when they settled down for the night was that Johnson's plan wasn't going to work out, and it would be a few years until they understood the magnitude of what they had prevented, and indeed the importance of what their curiosity-driven discoveries would enable. For now, Tobias and Kira were curled up on the couch with Freddie, content to put a crazy night behind them and settle down with all the TV they could ever watch and all the candy they could ever eat. Thank you for listening to Pumpkin Splice, written by Craig A. Falconer, narrated by Hector Carrillo. Copyright 2020 by Craig Falconer. Production copyright 2021 by Craig Falconer. All rights reserved.